Good morning and welcome to day 2 of WestFest. We're excited that you've decided to join us for an awesome program this morning. My name is Courtney and I'm going to be behind the scenes today, making sure that everything goes well logistically. This is WestFest 2021, our 5th year. And if you're not familiar, WestFest is Ohio State University's celebration of science, sustainability, engineering, and outreach. And our week of programming is made possible thanks to a grant from the Ohio State Energy Partners. We're going to have a few short announcements just to make sure everyone has the best experience possible. But before I get into those, I do want to do a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land the Ohio State University occupies is the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandotte, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. There's a little bit of a sound in the background, so Kristen, maybe mute for just a second. Specifically, the university resides on land ceded in the 1975 Treaty of Greenville and the forced removal of tribes through the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We want to honor the resiliency of these tribal nations and recognize the historical context that has and continues to affect Indigenous peoples of this land. Now, for today's announcements, we do have live captioning available. You're able to toggle that on or off to suit your needs at the CC button that you probably see at the bottom of your screen. In order to not interfere with our captions, though, we've had to turn off the chat function. And so instead of chat, we're going to use Q&A. We do want to hear from you. We have Beth on hand, who's going to be keeping an eye on the Q&A and feeding questions to our presenters. And even if you don't have a question, but you have a thought or a comment, please feel free to share that in there as well. Finally, don't forget that WestFest has a digital event passport, and I will put the link to that in the Q&A in just a moment. Hi, Mimi. And if you're doing the digital event passport, you will watch our programs, complete some challenges, and then upload your completed passport, and we'll enter you to win some awesome WestFest prizes. So today's program is Herpetology, and it's presented by Stone Lab and the Ohio Sea Grant. And we have Dr. Kristen Stanford and Sue Bixler presenting from up north, and we have Beth Wallace serving as a moderator and co-educator. So I'm going to go off screen at this point and pass it off to our presenters.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear us. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Kristen Stanford, and this is my number 2 in education and outreach, Miss Sue Bixler. And we are coming to you live from Stone Laboratory, located up on Lake Erie, which before we get started today, and we're going to talk a little bit about one of the aspects of herpetology, which is just one of the many things that we do here at Stone Lab. We kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a background on what Stone Lab actually is for some of you that may not have heard of us before.
So Kristen cautioned me not to go into great length when I talked about the history of Stone Laboratory. So I'll start with how Ohio State acquired the island. So in 1925, a gentleman who used this particular island, their family sold it to a 20-year trustee of the Ohio State University by the name of Julius Stone. And Julius Stone purchased the island. We don't know for how much, but 48 hours later, handed it over, never put his name on the deed. Asked that OSU use it for education, outreach, and research. And so we have been using that particular handle and working in that capacity since 1925. So we are the oldest freshwater biological field station in the Great Lakes. And so we're very proud of that. A lot of people don't realize that the Ohio State University has that little gem hidden up here in the Great Lakes, Lake Erie specifically. So we would like to share a little bit about what we do specifically. And so herpetology was our choice today. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen.
Yes, and so like I said, one of the many things that we do here at Stone Laboratory is we teach, I'm the education and outreach coordinator, by the way. In addition to, I'm also a research biologist, I've been studying the Lake Erie water snake, which you can see back here, for the past 20 years. And the majority of my time has been spent here making my kind of research home base, Stone Laboratory. I also teach a field herpetology course, which is going to be available in the spring of 2022. 22, thankfully, for the, we've had to unfortunately cancel the past couple of years. But what we do here at Stone Lab encompasses research, education, and outreach. But for herpetology, what we thought with the audience that we might have today, what we wanted to kind of show you is just a little snippet of what it might be like to come up and experience our field trip program. And so I'm going to come up to the computer and hopefully we're going to share a video clip with you real quick on my computer here. So I'm going to share screen. Can everyone see that?
No, we can't see it right now, Kristen.
Oh, okay. Oh. Are we good now, Beth?
I bring a group of students up here every year as a science field trip, usually in October, as an opportunity for the kids to get out of the classroom and experience some hands-on activities in a working laboratory. My name is Tony Cabilo, and I teach 7th grade science at Phoenix Middle School, which is a part of the Worthington City Schools. Every year we like to come back because the students have an amazing experience with the graduate students and the people here at Ohio State, teaching them about issues that affect the Great Lakes. Some of the students' favorite activities are the fish dissection, the fish lab. It's amazing to see the faces of the students light up as they take the heart of a fish and they put it on their wrist and it syncs up with their heartbeat. The faces of the students, it's obvious that that's their favorite activity. I think the big takeaways that the students leave with are some things that they can do proactively to help combat some of the issues that are affecting the Great Lakes. Like they feel like they have an opportunity to contribute in a realistic way to science and the greater good of the community. But I also think they walk away seeing a different view of science that you don't necessarily get within the four walls of your classroom. Honestly, I think our favorite part is at the end of the day, sitting around the campfire and just retelling stories of the things that the students got to do during the day and seeing the kids connect with different students that they normally wouldn't connect with in the classroom.
Okay. So hopefully everyone got a chance to, whoa. Okay. Okay. No one cares about earwax. We're here to talk about snakes. So like the video clip mentioned, and you kind of got to see, if you bring a class of students up to us at Stone Lab, herpetology is just one of several different environmental lessons that the students can come to us and learn about. We have ornithology also, we have fish dissection, the science cruise, climate change walk, macroinvertebrates, all sorts of different things. But today we're going to focus on herpetology, and because we have a little bit more limited amount of time, we're just going to focus on some of the snakes that we have here, and that we usually will talk about when you come to visit us. So with that, we want to get out some live animals and talk about them. We want to work from a little bit.
Hey, Kristen?
I think what we'll do, yes.
Will you explain what herpetology is to some of the participants, and maybe ornithology, since you were throwing some big ologies out there?
But there was a lot of ologies. So herpetology is the study of reptiles and amphibians. And, like I said, what we would typically do in a herpetology segment is we would talk about a lot of the differences between reptiles and amphibians. And then we would talk about some of the local examples that we would have here at the laboratory, ways to identify them, some of their natural history, behaviors, what to do if you encounter them. So basically all of those different kinds of things. So we're going to fast forward a little bit, like I said, because we don't have as much time as we normally would like to be able to take with that. And we're just going to focus on just some of the snake aspects that we talk about within our herpetology segment, because we're going to talk a little bit, like I said, about the native snakes, and then we'll shift maybe to even some of the research opportunities with the field herpetology class, and then what I also have done for the past 20 years with the Lake Erie water snakes. So we're going to start with some native species first. And the first one that we usually like to show, and when we do introductions to snakes, a lot of times when we have to talk about this group of animals, we want to promote a positive experience, because so many people out there are either nervous or afraid or have just kind of some negative feelings around snakes. And I always attribute that to not being very familiar with them. And so one of our goals within just, a lot of what we do here at Stone Lab is that outreach component, and that's to promote a positive learning experience. So our first little snake that we're going to bring up for you guys to see, we're going to bring it up real close to the camera. This little snake is called a northern brown snake, and it is one of 8 native species that we have here on the Lake Erie Islands. And this little snake, also sometimes called a Decay's brown snake, actually more recently the common name was changed, is one of the very first ones that we see commonly here in the springtime up in northern Ohio, but they are also very common throughout the rest of the state. These little snakes are slug and worm eaters. We find them very often in leaf litter, in gardens, and amongst a lot of times underneath trash cans or logs or debris. But they're very commonly found in places that people inhabit. And that's so this is one that people come into contact with quite a bit. So usually I do, like, when we start talking to kids or even adults about it, we look at this little tiny snake here, and I make them guess as to whether or not this is just a baby snake, if this is a teenager snake, or if it's an adult snake. Well, because we can't really do the poll, I didn't get myself together to do like a poll. I'm just going to kind of tell you that this we would call like a teenager snake. So it's not quite an adult, but these snakes don't get very large. They only get, maximum body size about, 12, I would say 10 to 12 inches would be a really, really big Decay's brown snake. So this little girl right here, and she is a female, she is probably about 2 or 3 years old. We've had her since last year. My 5-year-old daughter found her while we were surveying for Lake Erie water snakes, and we ended up keeping her. These snakes are also, like I mentioned, they are slug and worm eaters, but they're also a live bearing species. And so if we just talked about how she's probably a teenager snake, can any of you guys imagine how small the babies are when they're born? They're about this big. So they're only about 2, maybe 2 inches long, and can curl up so small, they can curl up on a quarter. So they're very, very tiny, small little snakes. In fact, most of the time when they're babies, their earthworms are bigger than these little northern brown snakes right here.
Does this snake have a name, Kristen?
She does. This is Miss Lexi. And my 5-year-old named her. And so she is, for a lot of the oops, just dropped her on the table. For some of the kids and even adults that are a little apprehensive about getting up close and personal with one of our captive animals, she's a favorite because she is so tiny and can quite literally fit in the palm of your hand. Okay.
All right, you wanna put her away?
Okay.
Miss Grabby Pants.
Wow. So the next little snakes, Miss Vivian, interesting. Well, we have two actually examples of garter snakes in here. This is an eastern garter snake. And now most people who have a snake experience or have seen a snake in their backyard will usually have a garter snake story, right? So they are very, very common throughout the state, and we do have them here on the islands. And can you bring Cindy over? So we have two different captive animals. One that this one that I'm holding here is Vivian, but then also here, this is Cindy. And what I want you to see is one of the big identifying features here. Hold it for a minute. Cindy's gonna be very rambunctious right now. The identifying feature for all of our different garter snake species is that dorsal longitudinal stripe. Can everybody see that? Goes all the way down from the top of their head, all the way down their back. And so if you see a snake that has that stripe, that is a good indicator that it's going to be one of our garter snake species, eastern garter snakes just being one. We also have plains garter snakes. We have short head garter snakes in a very, very small area that toward the eastern part of the state. We also have ribbon snakes, which are very closely related within the garter snake type family.
Kristen, you had a question come in about the largest snake in Ohio.
The largest snake in Ohio. I'm going to go with in length or in mass. Length would probably be either a racer or a rat snake. Our rat snakes are very long, but in mass, probably a timber rattlesnake. A very large male or even a pregnant female would be really big, or even our water snakes are pretty large. But I would say for the most part, the snakes in Ohio are, I would say, medium size. We don't get any of like the really, really big ones that some of the southern states have, like an indigo snake that gets like 9 feet long. So, okay, so garter snakes, yeah, and Beth, just if you get questions, just fire them off. I'm going to give you Cindy back because Vivian is.
Kristen, just to interject for a minute, when I teach the younger kids and sometimes even older adults call them garden snakes. And we like to correct that. If you look at the spelling of their name, it's not garden, it's garter snake. And it's named after the garters that used to hold up the socks for the guys that were little short pants way back when. So we oftentimes have to, yes, I tell the kids they're found in gardens because of what they like to eat, but their true name is garter snake.
Yes, garter, eastern garter snake.
There's a question, do you ever find garter snakes in the water?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, absolutely. Not necessarily very commonly found in the water, but they will go in the water and be looking for food next to the water. Our eastern ribbon snakes, which is what we have in kind of the northwest part of Ohio, are very commonly found in marshlands and wetlands, and they eat a lot. Their diet is primarily a lot of tadpoles and recently metamorphed amphibians and like frogs and salamanders and such. with the more terrestrial types of garter snakes, like this garter snake here, the eastern garter snake. We also have Butler's garter snakes, like I mentioned, I think I did, and then short head garter snakes, plains garter snakes. Those are a little bit more terrestrial. They can go in the water, but their diet is going to be, it's general. They'll eat a little bit of everything, but a lot of worms, again, amphibians, some small like nestling mammals, that field mammals like field mice or voles, but they will also go into a pond and eat some fish as well. These
You had a
go ahead.
question about how old the snake is that you're holding and where, like how old it can get and where they like to live. Like
Great
in
question.
what kind of area?
So this snake, as far as how old it is, we've had Miss Vivian here for about 3 years now, and she was just a yearling when we got her. So she's about 4 years old. As far as longevity or length of time that these snakes will live, I would say on average, most garter snakes are going to live probably between 8 and 10 years old. That would be a pretty old garter snake. So a lot of people do not realize that. So she is not necessarily, she's not real big right now. And like I mentioned, she's probably, like I said, I think she's 4 years old now that I think about it. But especially female garter snakes, because I think maybe I didn't, they are another live bearing species, which means that the females will actually hold all of the offspring inside of them. And then they don't lay eggs. They actually come out in an individual sac. It's not true vivipary like animals have, but their little yolk sac comes out, the little baby snake comes out. But anyway, the females, because they are live bearers, a lot of times the females are the larger of the two sexes then, and they can get quite large. In fact, a female garter snake can get probably over 3.5 feet long when they get fairly old. And they have been recorded to have like some of the larger litter sizes can be between 40 and 60 babies per female, which is just outrageous. It's a lot of baby snakes. But yeah, very common species that we find. Like I said, most people, that have a interaction with a snake, it's often one of these garter snakes. And they're one that we see here on the island quite a bit.
Does that snake bite?
Well, that's also another good, we get that question a lot. And so my typical answer is, well, anything, especially if I'm talking to kids and we're doing a herpetology lesson, we always have to say, it was like, well, anything with a mouth has to bite, right? I mean, because if you're an animal, you need to bite in order to eat for the most part. You have to have some type of a mouth to eat. So yes, they will bite. But what you're really asking is, this snake going to bite me as an aggressive behavior, or is it going to show aggression by biting? All of our and this is why we have captive animals. All of our captive animals are used to being handled by people. And so for the most part, unless they've, it's been like a while since we've gotten into their cage and handled them, for the most part, all of the snakes that we use within our lessons are not going to bite us in aggression. They have learned that this is not necessarily something that they have to be nervous about. And that as long as we treat them with respect and we're not poking at their face or doing anything, that causes them distress, they're not going to bite us. But some animals, in any wild snake, if you were to encounter it in the wild, so this is it's a good lead into like, well, what do I do if I see one of these snakes in the wild? Well, honestly, your best bet is to just observe the animal as you've seen it, because most often you're going to be able, if you do not disturb it, you're going to be able to potentially see it do something in the wild that you might not have gotten to see if you were to try to pick it up or to grab it or to disturb whatever it is that it was doing. So my recommendation is not necessarily pick it up unless you absolutely have to. Now, if you're to come into contact, like, well, it was in my garage or it was in my window well, what should I do? Then, then just be aware that yes, any snake that if you're going to grab it, it may try to bite you because it is unsure if you are grabbing it or touching it in a way that could be harmful to it, like if you're going to kill it or something.
Kristen, while you have this garter snake out, kind of go over the features that show that this is a non-venomous snake, something that a casual observer might not know.
Well, okay, so a non-venomous species, I'm going to bring her head right in here. Can everybody see that nice round pupil? Okay. Well, non-venomous species have the round pupil, okay? Whereas a venomous species is going to have what they call an elliptical pupil or a cat eye pupil, okay? But you got to get pretty close for that. And if we back up, really the important thing to know wherever you are at, and to go back and reiterate what I said, if you see a snake in the wild and you're not familiar with how to readily identify snakes, the best way to protect yourself and the animal is to just not mess with it and just not touch it. But as far as venomous species that we have in Ohio, we have 3 different venomous snakes. We have the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, we have the timber rattlesnake, and we have the northern copperhead. So those are the 3 venomous snakes that we have in Ohio, none of which are found up here on the islands any longer. We used to actually have timber rattlesnakes, but those were extirpated back in the 1960s. So, the round pupil is definitely something to look for as far as identifying. Oh, look at the camera. Look at that. Very photogenic she's being right now. Is definitely something that to look.
Questions. I think we've got a couple classes on right now. So
okay.
Student questions. One is how many or do they have bones? They also would like to know the youngest snake that we have, and if there's one that most commonly bites you.
So yes, snakes absolutely have bones. They are a vertebrate animal, so they have a full skeletal system. They just don't have limbs, but they have vertebrae and they have a lot of ribs all the way down, starting all the way up here towards their neck, just behind the head, and then the ribs will go all the way down, almost to the base of the tail here, to where the vent is. This is this little area right here, which is called a cloaca, or often in herpetology, we call it the vent. One of the measures that we take on snakes, for example, to kind of see how big they get from year to year is called a snout to vent length. So that's the measure from the tip of the nose, the snout right there, all the way to where its vent is, which is right there. It's in the vent, or the cloaca is a common anal opening, which is where they're going to excrete, they're going to go to the bathroom. So any urates and feces come out of there, as well as, remember, we mentioned that they are a live-bearing snake, so the babies would come out of the cloaca as well when the female would give birth. And then what you said, what is the oldest snake that we have? Was that it?
Yeah, there's a question about the oldest snake that you have, the youngest snake that you have.
Yes, in fact, well, that's a great way to transition to the oldest snake that we have, which is I'm going to let Sue get Bernadette out, and I'm going to let her. This is Sue's probably her favorite baby that she loves to take with her in all outreach programs that we do here at Stone Lab. She is quite the star.
She is.
I'll let her get her out and bring her up to the camera and go ahead.
So we'll introduce you to Bernadette. She's an eastern fox snake. She loves to explore. This is probably the most popular for kids to hold and interact with. This snake has a very limited range, and so we do find it here on the island. So this is a great snake for us to interact you know, the brown snake's cute, but this guy the kids can actually interact with, hold, understand. It actually helps alleviate a lot of fears when we put this little guy in their hands. These snakes, for the most part, are very docile anyways, even in the wild. But we ask people, like we said, just to respect, you know, the snake, to not get, if we're putting it in your hands, to respect it, to not get too close to its face. And she is a delight. I see smiles on kids' faces that just bring joy to me every day. So we're going to let Kristen talk a little bit about why they are, well, actually such a limited range in Ohio, Ontario, Canada, and a little bit in Michigan.
Yeah.
They've got some plights that were,
You just hold her up, I'll just keep.
all right, I'll hold her. Kristen will talk.
So yes, the eastern fox snake, as far as their range, are pretty limited within the United States and even within Ohio. So we only have them in about 6 counties in the northwest part of the state. So really, if you're looking at from about the Toledo area, and then if you start moving along the lake shore east, they really don't get any further east than about Huron or Vermilion. So if you're familiar with that, it's kind of the just at the start of the Central Basin. And then they really don't get any further south than what northern Seneca County, which is just a little bit south of Fremont, Ohio. They are found in a few counties, also in eastern Michigan, again, surrounding Lake Erie. And they are also found a little bit in Ontario, Canada, again, southern Ontario, along the lake shore, or on some of the islands in the Georgian Bay area. So for this particular species in Canada, for example, they are listed as an endangered species in Canada. And then in Michigan, they are considered a threatened species because of how limited their range is. Well, in Ohio, they also, like I just mentioned, they do have a limited range, but for us, it was at least pretty beneficial. I was involved along with a counterpart of mine in the mid-2000s, and we looked at how the fox snake populations were doing in Ohio. And even though they have a very limited range, they have very, very stable populations. And so they're listed as a species of concern, but they have not been elevated to a threatened or endangered status yet, even though they, like I said, that they are very limited through the state. Now, one of the main issues that we have with the eastern fox snake, as far as threats to their population, are the first one I want to talk about is their misidentification as a venomous species. Now, we just talked about that there's 3 different venomous species in Ohio: the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, the timber rattlesnake, and the copperhead. And so 2 of those 3 are rattlesnakes. Well, with eastern fox snakes, often when we see them or find them in the wild, they are, as you can see from looking at Miss Bernadette here, they're a pretty boldly patterned snake. And when we're walking around, whether it's in the field or the woods or wherever we happen to be, we're going to find a snake and we're going to see it typically on the ground, right? Well, when fox snakes, when you happen upon a wild fox snake, often what they will do is they will rattle their tail as a defensive behavior when they feel threatened. Now, I'm not sure if Miss Bernadette is going to do it here, because she's, like I mentioned, she's so used to being handled. And maybe if I agitate her a little bit, she might. I doubt it though. But anyway, she will, a wild fox snake will actually buzz their tail. And there are a lot of other species besides just rattlesnakes that will rattle their tail and shake their tail very rapidly when they feel threatened. It's not just rattlesnakes. Well, going back to like where we usually see snakes, this snake or another one of her counterparts might be in some loose leaves or in some rocks, some sticks. And even when they shake the tail, they don't have the modified scales that make up a rattle like rattlesnakes do. But when they shake that tail, that vibration is going to resonate amongst the leaf litter, debris, or whatever she might be laying in and make an audible sound. And unfortunately, that is what leads a lot of these snakes to being misidentified as a rattlesnake, because they do that tail rattling behavior. So the other type of venomous snake that I mentioned that we have in Ohio is called the copperhead. Well, if we look real close here at Miss Bernadette.
It was a constrictor, by the way.
Yes, she is a constrictor. If we look real close here at the color of her head, so I'm not sure if you can see the kind of orangish, coppery colored head coloration that she has. Some of the individuals are even a little bit brighter than what she is. Well, a lot of people who are not familiar, again, not familiar with identifying snakes, but they may have heard that we have a venomous snake called a copperhead. They come into contact with a snake like this. They see this kind of orangish coppery colored head, and they immediately jump to the conclusion that it must be a copperhead. And then they go to extreme measures, unfortunately, often, and either destroy the animal or,
Would you like
harm
to hear
it.
it? I actually have it.
Oh, the tail rattle?
Yeah, if I can make it loud enough here. That's Miss Penny when she didn't get enough to eat.
So there's an example of like, it actually does have a very audible, like loud, audible buzzing sound. And so many people will mistake that then for a rattlesnake, unfortunately. And they get misidentified and killed as a result.
So you're getting a lot of sort of repeat questions. I think some of the students are just excited. So can you
That's
share very specifically what kind of things they might eat out in the wild and what
That's a
you
good
feed
question.
them in captivity as opposed to what they might eat out there? And can you talk a little bit again about where they live?
Yes. So eastern fox snakes, like I said, just around kind of the western basin counties surrounding Lake Erie. And these snakes are they're very closely related. If you've ever heard of a black rat snake, which we find pretty commonly throughout the state of Ohio, they're in the rat snake family. But this particular type of rat snake, which like we said is called the eastern fox snake, but is more associated with the wetlands that we would have along that western basin of Lake Erie. So the types of things that they are eating include a lot of nestling birds and bird eggs, especially our ground nesting waterfowl, like mallard ducks and teal. But they also will climb up into wood duck nests and boxes. In certain wetland marsh areas that have a lot of meadow vole populations, they're eating a lot of meadow voles and small mammals. Around here on the islands, they're eating all of the, those same avian species, along with we get chipmunks, so other small mammals. Somebody previously asked about garter snakes going into the water and if we ever see them in the water, and hopefully you remember my answer was yes, but not very common. Well, with fox snakes, interestingly enough, even though they're considered, they're terrestrial, they're not an aquatic, they're a terrestrial species, but they're very, very comfortable in and around the lake shore and in wetlands. And it is not that uncommon to see fox snakes hopping into the water. And we actually will see them swim, especially between Gibraltar and South Bass, quite frequently. There was a study was done up in Canada where if you've ever heard of the Georgian Bay Islands, where it's just, there's so many islands in this one particular area. These snakes move from island to island almost on a daily basis. So they're getting into the water and swimming back and forth like all the time.
And Bernadette is by no means full grown. I was trying to stretch her out so you could see. Yeah, this snake can get about 5 to 6 feet. It's got lost Kristen there.
It's okay.
So
As I'm trying to slip up. So there you can see.
people ask me how old she is.
She's our oldest snake, and yeah, she's only about 3 feet long. But eastern fox snakes are the largest eastern fox snake that we ever found in our kind of larger scale distribution study was just over 6 feet long. he was a very, very, very big male fox snake.
You're getting questioned a couple times about what is the best type of snake where you live and why. And I kind of leave that open to you to answer how you want to answer that.
I like this one at my house. I live along the water's edge because it keeps all the mice population down. I know we have a neighbor that has one in his out garage in the barn, and he absolutely loves it because he doesn't have a mouse problem.
Yeah.
But I don't know that there's a.
I know it's hard. You know, assigning who's the best and who's the worst, you know, I don't know about that. I can tell you from an outreach perspective, and this the eastern fox snakes are one of, at least from my perspective, one of the best ones to use for that positive snake interaction. And it's one that we're going to transition here to because we're getting to the end of our time, that we used quite a bit within our Lake Erie water snake education and outreach program. And that's because, you know, again, I'm going back to one of our goals was to promote overall education, awareness, positive experience with snakes in general, because we couldn't really start talking about conserving one particular species if we were dealing with people or someone who was uncomfortable with snakes in general. So we would start with something that's very docile, very beautiful looking snake, would provide a positive interaction and a positive experience with people. And then we would start talking about, well, now I want to tell you about this particular species and why it's important to conserve or change our behavior for the sake of their conservation. And so that leads us to this our last but not least snake that we're going to talk about, and that is the Lake Erie water snake. And I don't think I did have a video clip that I was going to show you, but I don't think we're going to do that just because I feel like we're running out of time, and I'd rather you guys be able to see this snake and ask questions. But the real short story of the Lake Erie water snake here is that this is an endemic, which means that it is only found here on the Lake Erie Islands, an endemic subspecies of the northern water snake. And it was formerly federally threatened and state endangered up until just 2011, when we were able to successfully recover the populations here on the islands and delist it from the endangered species list, which is something that, you know, I can say that I mentioned before, I've been working with Lake Erie water snakes now in the conservation program for about 20 years. And it's something that I'm very proud of. And it's an example of how recovery is supposed to work under the Endangered Species Act. And so to talk a little bit about the snake, the Lake Erie water snake was described as being different from northern water snake populations because this is Mr. Lewis here. He's one of our captives. So I'm going to hold up. Can everyone see that he has no marks on him whatsoever? So he's what we call an unbanded individual. He has no dorsal, which is the backside, dorsal or ventral. This is the belly side. Blotching. And that, as opposed to, Sue just brought up a little picture that we're going to show you of a northern water snake, which has very heavy banding along the dorsal side. And they don't show a picture in this particular, or at least as far as the vent goes, but they also, northern water snakes have a lot of markings on their belly. So Lake Erie's, like I mentioned, are only found on the islands in the western basin of Lake Erie. They were formerly listed species. Oh, there, Sue's going to show a map.
So basically, and including Pelee Island in Canada. So all of our small Lake Erie islands, including Pelee in Canada.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I like to talk about with water snakes, so they are a water snake, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to live in water or be in the water, but they're called water snakes because they're going out into the water primarily to get their food. So they're living really along that interface between the land and the water. So along that shoreline habitat. And sometimes that can be, you know, depending on the area, it can be very, very limited. If it's like, for example, on someone's dock, they may only be living in an area that's like, you know, less than 5 or 6 feet wide, and then just going out into the lake and then coming back into the dock. Or it could be a much more expansive, you know, tens of meters of natural shoreline habitat that they're utilizing, but they're really living along the shoreline. The kinds of things that they're eating are bottom dwelling fish and amphibians. So, and in fact, more recently, what we were able to show with a lot of our research is these water snakes now are eating almost exclusively a small fish called the round goby. And that's actually an invasive species that was introduced into Lake Erie in the mid 1990s. And the interesting part about that is most of the time we hear really bad things about invasive species, right? Invasives are bad invasives. And that is mostly true. But sometimes, every once in a while, you get a situation where we have an invasive species that actually is facilitating some kind of positive benefit or some kind of, it has a positive attribute. And in this case, it was a very prevalent and abundant food source for our Lake Erie water snakes. And it's actually one of the reasons why we were able to hit our population goals within our recovery plan so quickly, because of the abundance of round gobies available and how that impacted their basically the number of snakes that we saw and were able to find on the Lake Erie Islands.
We always caution the kids, though, that if you catch a goby, you don't want to throw it back in. We don't like it. It's an invasive fish. It has benefited our little guy, but they aren't going to eat 10 billion of them, which are currently the estimate on the bottom of the Western Basin of Lake Erie. So they're still a fish that you don't want here. They are not good for our native fish population because they eat the eggs. But they've done a great job to help bring this back. Kristen minimizes, though, too, the amount of work that they've done through education. I always like to show some of the signs that hang around the island. That's just trying to educate people it's not invasive, that the water snakes are welcome here. So it wasn't just the goby, it was the whole interaction of everything that was done to try to help this snake out. I always tell my kids it's not cute and cuddly like a panda bear, but it has such an important role. Kristen always says any evolution textbook you open up, you're going to find this story, because this little guy is going through changes to make itself not so available to its prey by changing its color.
Can you share what people were doing to be?
Yes, absolutely. So the 3 primary threats at the time of listing, which the snake was listed in the fall of 1999, was low population size. So it was estimated there's only about 1,500 to 2,000 left. Habitat destruction. So we had a lot of shoreline clearing and development that was happening in non-snake friendly ways. And then we have on record, specifically for the Lake Erie water snake, one of the most well-recorded instances of population decline through purposeful human persecution. So people were actually going out of their way to kill these snakes as they found them when they were basically making their cottage or developing their dock or their patio. And they were going out of their way to kill these snakes. So those were the 3 threats.
Why would somebody kill a snake?
Well, and why would this is the age old, you know, we have, unfortunately, just a lot of people have a very deep-seated fear or dislike or discomfort with snakes. And it's something, like we said, within our education and outreach program, we're always trying to promote a positive interaction. And one of the things that this is actually our Lake Erie water snake website that we have is called Respect the Snake. So it wasn't necessarily for us about getting someone to like them or turn into a snake lover or anything like that. What we wanted to do is convey a level of respect that this animal is part of the natural Lake Erie environment, and to try to find ways for people to coexist peacefully with them without killing them. And, you know, to fast forward with that, that was a successful strategy, and that actually worked. People responded to that. They recognized that we were not trying to turn them into like some newfound snake lover, that they're going to go out and get a pet snake. You know, in other words, saying, you know, you got to, you know, respect Lake Erie water snake, that we just wanted to find a way for there was a peaceful coexistence that could happen.
So, and a lot of people, because these snakes are a little bit aggressive, they're a little bit, have more of a tendency to bite. Not so much this little guy, again, he's used to being held. But like Kristen said, trying to get that message that if they're on your dock, there's a way to get rid of them without hurting them. If they're in your boat, this is what you do. And that's part of the education that she's been a big part of, is to try to educate landowners, boat owners, what the proper way to interact with a snake is, because they're here. They're a part of this ecosystem. It's important that people learn to interact with them. One of the other fallacies, I think, is people thinking they're a water moccasin.
Yes, unfortunately, you know, we talked a lot about some of the other species being misidentified. People will see a snake in the water and immediately go to, oh, it must be a water moccasin. Well, no, actually, we don't even have water moccasins, a population of water moccasins in the state of Ohio at all. Even in extreme southern Ohio, we do not have water moccasins. And so a lot of what we do is just, you know, again, reiterating that no, it's not a venomous species. It's not something that is harmful or going to hurt you or your dog or your kids if you come into contact with them along the shoreline or swimming. That it's just a harmless water snake. Now, are they aggressive? Absolutely. This is definitely one where I get the like, is it going to bite me? If you come into contact with a wild Lake Erie water snake and you attempt to grab it, it's going to bite you 9 out of 10 times. One of their very, very common defensive behaviors is to bite and to writhe around as a defense for predators that might try to eat it. So yes, absolutely. They are typically an aggressive species. Now, when I bring a snake into a classroom and I want to say, here you go, I want to show you that Mr. Lewis here. And then kids say, is he going to bite me? No, like we said before, our captive animals are very used to being handled, and we want to provide a positive experience and not have you walk away with the snake bite. Although some people come to me and say, like, I came here just to get bit by a snake, which we can also make happen.
Does the bite hurt?
So I'm going to go with not really. I mean, but I'm pretty used to it. People always ask, you know, have you ever been bitten? Absolutely, like tens of thousands of times. I've been doing this for 20 years. Every once in a while you get, you know, a bite that is a little bit more painful, I would say, than a chewer, as we say. You know, it hurts for a second, but honestly, like a bite will typically heal up within 2 or 3 days. I really don't, unless it's like what we would call like a slash one, where they sometimes if they bite and then they pull, you'll get like, it's almost like a extreme paper cut. Those ones tend to hurt a little bit more. They burn a little bit more because they keep getting like pulled open. One of the worst things I would say as far as like having lots of water snake bites is snakes will shed their teeth. And so sometimes when you get bit, some of the little snake teeth might come off in you. And if that heals up, what'll happen is it just feels like a little splinter, or it gets a little itchy. But really no big deal. Been bitten, like I said, thousands and thousands of times, never had any infection, never anything like severe, crazy. I don't even have, I think probably I could count on one hand the number of times I even put a Band-Aid on it. So yeah, you'll live to see another day.
This is Lewis's buddy Clark. So we have Lewis and Clark.
And you are at your about 5-minute mark, so we could take some last questions from the group before we turn it back over to Courtney. So does anybody else have some questions? It looks like there's one question about, was the animal you just had, that snake, a baby, a teen, or an adult? And are wild snakes ever allowed to be pets for people?
Both good questions. So both Lewis and Clark are about 3-year-old males. And so they would just be coming into what we would call just their reproductive size. So they're kind of like almost adults, but not really. Probably our largest adult males are going to be about 2.5 feet long. The females are the larger of the two sexes with water snakes, again, because they're live bearing, and most of the time with live bearing species, the female is always the larger one. So females will get about 3.5 to 4 feet long when they're at adult size. So those are small, we're going to call those small adult males, larger teenagers. Good question. So then that last one, can you keep a wild snake, a snake that you found in the wild, as a pet? Well, in general, no, you're not necessarily supposed to go out and collect an animal and bring it into the wild. You have to have special permission from the Division of Wildlife to do so. Now, that being said, if let's say that you had, there's some nature centers and other reasons why you would want to like keep a garter snake or keep a water snake, you can submit for permission to the Division of Wildlife to keep an animal as a pet. So it's like you can't just grab one and take one and just like that's it. You kind of ask permission. There are some individuals I think out there that probably have some species that they're raising that are very similar or close to some of our natives that we have. I always recommend to people that if you're looking for a pet snake, always go to a breeder, to somebody who, they are going to have a lot of knowledge and they care about what happens to the offspring that, that they've spent a lot of time in rearing. So go to somebody who's been breeding snakes for a long time before you just grab one, because they're going to give you really good tips about how to care for the animal properly.
One thing I wanted to mention, because it's important to me, is, and I'm going to grab this jar, is occasionally, and again, I don't know if you can see, I don't want to end on a sad note, but this is one of our water snakes. They do breathe air. They got entangled in a fishing line and drowned. And so it's always important to make sure, and you guys hear about single-use plastics, things that we find in the water, fishing line, even a pop can. A snake can swim in, get its head caught in a pop can, not be able to release itself, get entangled in fishing line. So there's some things that we can do to try to help our population of snakes, whether they're aquatic or terrestrial, to try to help, good habits that we can do to try to keep this from happening or having animal entanglement occur. Any more questions, Beth, that have popped up on the screen?
Nope, I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney.
We're close.
Yeah, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. I enjoyed hearing all about the snakes. And I just want to remind folks, also, I just want a big shout out to the teachers who had their students log in this morning. That was the most active chat we've had, and we appreciate the engagement and the questions from everyone in the audience. We do have 3 more WestFest programs today. We have one on energy, one on water, climate, and conservation. And then this evening, the Bird Polar and Climate Research Center is going to do a virtual tour. So you get to see behind the scenes at Bird Polar. And we have a total of 18 programs left in our schedule for the week. So don't forget that WestFest goes through Saturday, October 16th. And you can check out the schedule at go.osu.edu/WestFest. So with that, we're going to sign off for today. Thanks again for bringing the wonderful snakes to visit, and we'll see y'all later.